Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Thanks a lot, Global Patties. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. You know, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsor support. They help make all of this happen and provide us the ability to bring you each episode. With that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsored this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor and our sometimes guest co-host, Kirsten Trainer, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. Hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. With this episode, we start our 5-part series on hive types that are hives other than Langstroth. Today, we start with Stewart Anderson of Flow Hive, but more on that in a moment. That'll be a good series, won't it, Kim?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this because I don't know a lot about hives other than Langstroth hives. Of course, the Flow Hive is basically a Langstroth hive. It's just got some gadgets to it that make harvesting easy, but some of these are not at all anything I'm used to.
Yeah, and I guess we should qualify. We're keeping it to the hives that you can actually inspect and are basically legal in each state. So we're not looking at skeps or any log hives or
right.
hives in a wall.
Yep, you can buy these someplace somewhere and they'll make a beekeeper out of you.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it because as many people, I grew up just reading about and learning about and wanting to learn to keep bees in a Langstroth hive. And that's how I grew up, and especially around Medina area, of course, with AI Root and the hives that he had or they made there. I mean, I had quite the privilege of being able to go out and getting their factory seconds. And boy, oh boy, even their factory seconds were better than many other companies' firsts, premium cuts.
Yeah, when the root company was making wood, they made furniture.
It was wonderful.
That's what it was. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not just saying it just because Root is our prime sponsor, but I really, really, really appreciated their woodenware and wish I still had a barn full of it.
I don't have a barn full, but I've got some of the things that I had early on when I was back doing 10 frames and some of that equipment, and it's still furniture.
Oh, I bet. Well, years ago, in the first year of writing articles with you, I did the first woodenwares and woodenware article, a Wooden World or something like that, and where we went out and bought hive tops and frames from 4 or 5 different manufacturers, including Root and
I believe, yeah,
Kelly, and
you're going back a ways here.
Well, I don't want to go. I don't say how far I'm going back, but it was quite a ways back, and just looking at how how the quality assurance of the different companies really made a difference, and how those frames sat in those boxes, and where you might expect burr comb and where you might expect problems. Even today, frames across the top bar frames, I have some of those frames top bars warping or dropping. So that's naturally, of course, where you end up getting a lot of burr comb. And I don't remember that 20 years ago. Now I'm sounding really old.
Yeah, you are.
Anyways, so this is different. We we go off down into the weeds. But this is, I'm looking forward to this, as we're saying, a 5-part series on different hive types. Sorry about that, folks. Including today's Flow Hive. We got the top bar hive. We have a horizontal hive, the Slovenian AZ hive, and hyper hive. And so we kind of across the board, anything that's not your standard 10-frame, 8-frame Langstroth hive. And so, Kim, you were talking before we started recording, you were attending a symposium earlier this week?
Right. I was the UC Davis School of Honey and Pollination put on a symposium, a Zoom symposium, and it was on honey adulteration is what they were looking at. They were covering this subject from basically 3 perspectives, Jeff. One of them was from the retailer's perspective and the people that sell honey to the public right off their grocery store shelves, which is a different animal than when you're buying it in barrels and putting it in cereal vats. So it's that difference of honey. And then we talked to a couple they talked to a couple commercial beekeepers, one of which, Jason Miller, is John Miller's son, and he's now running John Miller's operation. John's kind of stepped back, and Jason's running it. He's running 15,000 colonies, and he makes 1 million pounds of honey a year. He had some thoughts on honey adulteration and what it's been doing to his business. And then we talked to a government official that we're going to get on our show coming down the road, a guy named Roger Simmons, and he's USDA AMS, I'll get it right, leading the pack on testing honey from anywhere, but primarily imported honey for adulteration, for contaminants, for anything that shouldn't be there. And Jeff, this guy can weigh a molecule to 3 decimal places.
Wow.
And that's the technology that they're using. That's what they're using. You bring honey in, it better meet all of the specs, because his machine will tell you if it doesn't. But the retail people represented, so you may recognize some of these names: Zingerman's and Woodstock Farmers, and the Good Food Awards people. Mm-hmm. Remember talking to them?
Yeah.
The Glen Gordon Market, Austin Cheese Shop, Buy Right Market. All of these people. The people that were here were the people kind of running these operations, 100, 200 stores and the things that they do to teach people what honey tastes like and what it should taste like. So we got that aspect, and these are specialty and gourmet stores, basically. And of course, you're going to pay more for honey, but they make darn sure that what their customers are getting is the best that there is. Chris Hyatt Honey Company. He runs California and North Dakota. He runs about 20,000 colonies, and he was talking about the effects of cheap imported honey on his business, as was Jason Miller. And these guys are really taking it on the nose, because when you can buy 80-cent honey from offshore and it costs you $2.50 a pound to make it here, you got to sell it for more. So there was that aspect of commercial. It was a good 2-hour program, and one of the things that we got to talk about quick was the commercial item description of honey that the U.S. government's working on now, and hopefully that'll get into place. And what this is it takes the definition of, when the U.S. government buys anything, whether it's a truck or a blanket or a load of sand, they give a description of what they're going to buy to the person that's selling it to them, so that what they buy is what they're going to get. And they know what they want, and the seller better be able to identify and live up to all of the expectations. And the honey is, the definition of honey right now is a thick syrup made from nectar of flowers dehydrated and by bees in a hive. That's about as technical as it gets. There's another one. The definition is a little more technical, the one out of Rome, but this one puts them all to shame. Money has got a definition, when we talked to Jeff Pettis about adulteration there. But this one goes even steps further in this, and I hope they get it adopted, because it will end this problem. The Roger Simmons, the guy that we were talking to, like I said, can measure molecules to 3 decimal points. The technology's there. All we got to do is get it in place and make sure it gets paid for. And you know who's going to pay for it. It's the person doing the importing, not the eventual purchaser. So they recorded it, and it's going to be available. But I just talked to them this afternoon, and they don't know what the cost is going to be yet. But if you go to the Honey and Pollination Center at UC Davis, I'm sure they'll have a link there about the middle of next week, they said. And if you want to chase it, it'll be worth your money. It was a good 2 hours.
It sounds like what it really was. And just for clarification, adulterated honey, and when we speak about adulterated honey, that's speaking primarily about adulterated imported honey. That's the focus.
Well, that tends to be the biggest problem, but not the only problem. Sometimes it isn't coming in from offshore. Sometimes it starts here.
Okay.
So these people, they want to find too.
Very good. Well, good. We'll have to look for that recording once it's available. Kim, I was listening to Honeybee Obscure. I had to take a car drive the other day, or actually just this morning, and I was listening to the latest Honeybee Obscure. You guys are fun to listen to, surprisingly. Just kidding. I enjoyed it. It was good.
Was that the one on eating comb honey?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, that was fun to make. And it's been so long since I've had anything that I could eat, I could make comb honey out of, that I had to go back and think about it. The next one we got coming up is one that's going to be interesting too. It's going to be about stinging, and beekeepers get stung. That's a fact of life. But there's a lot of things you can do to make it an almost zero experience, A, or B, a really bad day. And
yeah,
we're kind of looking at both of those. What you can do about it, what you should do about it. Some adventures we've had in the past, and some adventures we just as soon not relive. So. Honeybee Obscure. We're having a lot of fun with it.
I'll look forward to that one. The comb honey one was fun because one of my earliest memories of my grandparents, their house, and the comb honey in the cardboard box with a little clear window on it, and with the wooden frame around it, the little wooden frame that you could leave on or just pull off. And seeing those, and even I've seen it in a catalog once or twice. It just brings back memories. That's the way I envision comb honey. But of course, it comes in many different ways now.
Do you want a quick story on that container you just told?
Sure. Well, as long as you don't destroy my memory of my grandparents.
Nope. This is a good one. When the root company was in the bee business, raising bees and making honey, raising queens, they had a honey yard, and it was full of basswood trees. They planted basswood trees. As the basswood trees grew up, they provided shade for the hives, and this was in the queen rearing yard, so you need a little protection from the hot sun. As they got taller, then of course they began to blossom, and the bees there made basswood honey, which is a delicacy beyond description, I think.
I love that. Yes.
And then as the trees got older, they got bigger and they had to be thin, so they took out like every one or every third, and they used the wood to make those basswood sections they put the comb honey in. So they got triple use out of a basswood tree.
That's very cool. That is neat. Yeah. And again, back to the root woodenware.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good memories about it. I like it. Speaking of podcasts, we've been helping Kirsten with her new podcast on 2 Million Blossoms. Her website is up, and if you go out to 2millionblossoms.com, and there she has a podcast page, you can listen to them from her website, or you can also download them and listen to them from Apple or Google or Spotify or any other place that you prefer to listen to your podcast. So please give Kirsten podcast a good listen. I'm sure you'll like it. So Kim, do you have a book review for us? Have you been reading anything new?
I'm trying to read 6 books at once.
How's that going for you?
It's going slow. Fortunately, there's been 6 inches of snow on the ground, so I've had a little more time during the day than usual. But I got one quick one I want to tell you about. Coming down the road, we've got Gene Kritsky, the professor down in Cincinnati, and he's a expert on the history of beekeeping. He's written several books on the history of the hive and Egyptian beekeeping and those sorts of things. But he's also, I've known him for 30 years, and I didn't know anything about this. He's one of the leading experts on cicadas. And we've got Brood X that's coming up here. Now I'm in Ohio, and it's Ohio and a little bit south and a little bit a little bit east of us. And that's the only place it is, but it's a big brood. And they last a couple, 3 weeks when they're making their noise. And if you're keeping bees, you're going to be outside and you're going to be listening to cicadas. So he's got a book. It came out like yesterday, and I got a copy of it. It's called Periodical Cicadas, the Brood X Edition. The Brood X Edition. And even if you're not in Brood X, he talks about all the other broods across the U.S. And if cicadas you find interesting, you can get it on, I suppose, I got it on Amazon, but you can probably get it wherever books are sold. But it's one of those things where if you're a beekeeper, you're supposed to know about everything about every insect that exists. And here's one that makes a lot of attention for a short period of time, every 17 years.
There's a form of cicada that comes up every summer.
Yeah, there's some annuals and some longer, but this is the big one. This is the big brood, the big emergence. And we were able to catch them. I could go out on the porch in the morning and just sweep up a pile of them. And then I learned how to, after a very short period of time, if you pick one up and you hold it by the legs just so, and you stroke its back, you can make it hum. And it drove the cat crazy, and it drove my neighbors crazy. But I could pick it up, hold it by, it's got 6 legs. I hold it by 3 on one side, and then stroke the back, and it would that noise would come out of it. Just I could make it happen at will. It was pretty cool. So I'm kind of waiting to try that again.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were a cicada whisperer. Well, we have coming up our interview with Stewart Anderson, co-inventor of the Flow Hive, with he and his son, and to kick off our 5-part series on hive types. But first, a quick word from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. With us now is Stewart Anderson from Flow Hives. Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast, Stu.
Thank you so much, Jeff and Kim.
It's nice to meet you in person, finally. I've read so much about you and your operation and looked at your videos and things, but it's nice to have you here.
Well, likewise, Kim. You're renowned because your name pops up everywhere. So I'm honored to meet you as well.
And not just at the post office, right?
Yeah.
You're just in the...
Well, Stu, I visited your webpage a lot over the last few years and kind of followed the story, but and a lot of your stories on your webpage. But give us a kind of brief summary of where did the Flow Hive come from?
Most of the credit in terms of inspiration and drive was my son Cedar, but we worked together every step of the way. Now we're going back 16 years to when Cedar had about 20 or so hives and was supplying honey to local, health food stores and so on. And he is a hard worker in the sense that he'll work all night on a project, but he's not a hard worker in the sense that he likes physical work. So we were having a meal one night, a day after and during the day he'd been harvesting. 20 hives isn't very many from a commercial operator's point of view. It means you don't have any lifting gear, anything like that. It's all just hard physical labor, lifting heavy boxes, getting them into your shed, and the rest of the story in terms of harvesting. And we live in a subtropical area of Australia, right on the most easternmost bump. And so in the summer, it's very hot and humid. And so your bee suit sticks to you. If you haven't been looking after your queens and your breeding, then you're going to have some cranky hives. And so inevitably, Cedar was getting stung through his bee suit as well. So I said, Dad, there's got to be a better way than this. Couldn't. And then he said this, what I thought was the most outrageous thing. He said, don't you reckon we could figure out a way to get honey out of a beehive without opening it? And I was just like, whoa, no way. But what an outrageous suggestion, you know. And so we have a habit of inventing little things together. And so from that moment, we started drawing what might be possible. We might have spent a couple of hours on it that evening. And that was that as far as I was concerned. But to my surprise, in the next couple of days, Cedar actually made some of the things tried to make some of the things we'd been dreaming up. They got very complicated with bits of car inner tube used as diaphragms to suck other bits, to attach to parts of comb, to pull them apart, and all sorts of things. And that started a 10-year journey of inventing and development, which for me as a father was just fun, you know, and it's such a pleasure and a joy to work so closely with one of my children. Just that would have been enough for me, really. I'm very grateful for the whole thing. But what happened was, after years and years of failures and both work and fun, we need an in-between word, don't we, for when you're working hard but it's fun. It's sort of, anyway, years and years we did it. And, you know, I wouldn't have thought of it happened to be me thinking about realizing that we could split the cells vertically and that they would turn into a vertical channel. But I wouldn't have done that without the, you know, to and fro. It was really us developing it all the way because our two minds were sort of locked together in a way. So we did it. And I still remember that exciting day when we used an old socket wrench plugged into our experiment inside the hive, and we turned that wrench and the honey flowed out. Unbelievable. Unbelievable moment. And but as anyone that's ever brought an invention to market, that's really just a small part of your journey, and that's something that I didn't know then. So, yep, we'd figured out how to get honey from a beehive without opening it, but we hadn't figured out how you would manufacture that on sort of a big scale. We hadn't figured out anything about how you bring these things to market. We didn't know any of that stuff.
I mean, that's a good background and history of the Flow Hive and how you came about it. So why don't you, for our listeners, talk about what is a Flow Hive? What is a Flow Hive? People might have a conception, but what is it really?
Yeah. Flow Hive is basically a Langstroth brood box with a Langstroth-sized super on the top, but the super has these different like frames made of, you know, high-grade food quality plastic that form a matrix for the bees to build their honeycomb on. But the plastic is cunningly devised so that you can turn a lever on the outside of the hive and the honey drains from literally underneath the bees' feet, with the capping staying intact. And the honey drains out of the frames through tubes and out the back of the hive to where you can collect it in jars or containers and so on. So it means you don't have to open the beehive. You don't have to disturb the bees. You can harvest honey any time of the day or night. And there have been a few incredible spin-offs with it that Cedar and I didn't realise. And one is that the honey tastes very, very bright and fresh. It's plenty of beekeepers have told me that's just like biting straight into fresh honeycomb, as we've all done, but without the wax. And also, it's much more easy to get a monofloral honey if you're in an area where bees are bringing in from, you know, successive sources of trees and flowers and so on. Then the bees will separate that, and generally with the flow frames, you can actually see sometimes 4 or 5 different types of honey in, you know, one for each frame, and therefore you can get to know the tastes of your local honeys and the local plants that produce them. So that was a spin-off, but the main purpose was to make it easier for beekeepers to harvest. And when Cedar and I were developing it, we were thinking commercial beekeepers. We didn't know what was going to happen. we thought we'd be helping particularly our Australian colleagues, commercial beekeepers, help them compete because there'd be less labour involved. Now, that turned out to be sort of wrong, but that's where we were going, making it easier for beekeepers, less labour, and easier on the bees too, because the hives don't get opened, and so therefore there's that less amount of stress on the bees.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
So it's, as I understand it, looking at the photos and having worked with the Flow Hive several times, it's a super, really, that fits on a Langstroth hive. You can take the super off and put Langstroth equipment back on the existing hive?
So, as I understand it, you're asking about the interchangeability of the Flow Hive with Langstroth hives? Yeah.
Well, the Flow Hive, I know you've got a lot of other equipment attached to that hive that helps legs and ant guards and things, but the frames themselves are fit in one super that you can take off and not use?
That's correct.
Okay.
The super is exactly the same size as a Langstroth full depth super, although it's been modified at one end so that you can take covers off and you can see the rear end of the frames, a clear plastic sort of window that gets effectively made by all the frames locking together, and the place where the levers go into work it, and the place where you plug in your tube so the honey comes out. So that's all just at one end. It means that the rebate, or as you call it, the rabbit, is a little bit lower at that end as well, just to accommodate the thicker tongue that sticks out that supports the frame. But basically, as you said, Kim, you can just lift that flow super off and replace it with a standard super, or you can add, if you're going for multiple boxes, then no problem to add an extra brood or an extra super of whatever type you like. And some of what we sell are a mix. There's 3 or 4 flow frames in the middle, sandwiched between 3 or 4 standard frames, which might the wooden frames with whatever foundation you're using. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was always designed to be flexible. Cedar and I, when we were inventing this, didn't realize, of course, what was going to happen. And we were thinking that all beekeepers are tinkerers like we are, which of course was silly, But so when we invented it and put it on the market, we assumed most people would just like to buy the frames and saw up their own boxes to fit them in. We were thinking of just existing beekeepers. It was a real surprise to us when 80% of the sales were for the whole kit, the whole hive, which was another accident in the way it went to get, well, not quite accident, but we said, we better, for some people will want the whole hive, so let's make one. And then Cedar said, well, it's got to be good looking. And I thought, what for? Because, I've been brought up with just, half-painted boxes sitting in the back of the yard or the paddock. And so, but Cedar insisted, no, it's got to be good looking. So I worked with him on that. And so that also opened up a market that we didn't realize existed. Not sure if anyone did, of people that did want to keep bees but didn't want them in sort of boxes that I grew up with. Anyway, so I've wandered off your question. Sorry, Kim. But, Langstroth compatible. Oh, there's another aspect to that. The flow frames are a set depth, the full depth of a Langstroth, but they can shorten or lengthen. You can add pieces or remove pieces so that they can become longer or shorter. So therefore, it's not too hard to adapt flow frames to the European size boxes, or perhaps someone's making a special size hive for themselves. They can make longer frames if they want, or shorter, just by adding or subtracting pieces and shortening the wires that hold it all together.
Pretty adaptable piece of equipment. You can make it fit anywhere, almost. I hadn't realized that.
When you're inventing something, like Apple Macintosh have said, right, we're going to make ours just suit ourselves and not compatible with anything else in the computer world. Now, of course, they've become more compatible as time's gone on. We didn't want to do that path. We wanted to make it adaptable for all the different beekeepers around the world. In those days, as I was saying, more towards the commercial, as we didn't really understand what the constraints would be for commercial beekeepers using our stuff. So, we tried to make it very adaptable.
Well, you have, as I noticed on the webpage, a lot of outlets in the U.S. where I could go get one of these. We have one in Central Ohio, Jeff. On your webpage, you've got all of these people listed and how to get a hold of them. So I'm not going to be paying freight from Australia to Ohio. I'm going to be paying freight from Ohio to Ohio. That's correct. How many outlets do you have in the U.S. offhand?
Well, we have 2 warehouses that they'll generally get shipped from in the US. So, and then the outlets I think you're talking about are what we call our ambassadors or resellers, and they will stock some as well. And I cannot tell you. I mean, I can get back to you with that information. I can't tell you how many ambassadors and resellers we have scattered throughout the United States.
Well, you've got a map on your webpage, so
okay.
I can find out more. I can find out most of.
Oh dear.
So when you got started, a lot of the people that were buying this were not seasoned beekeepers, but basically raw beginners.
Yeah, about 50% were raw beginners. It's quite a good title. And when we realized what was happening and what basically there were thousands and thousands of people around the world who'd been dreaming of keeping bees, and suddenly it seemed accessible to them. Really, our invention is another method of harvesting. Beekeeping was always accessible. We had beekeeping clubs, which I really enjoy being part of. They're not a secret society as such, but they do, keep to themselves and do what they do. Anyway, so beekeeping didn't seem accessible to someone that didn't know a beekeeper and hadn't joined a club or anything. And so that felt like suddenly there was a huge responsibility from my point of view and Cedar's point of view on us to say to people, look, you can keep bees. We'd like to encourage you, of course, but you've got to learn how to look after them. And while we were beginning to say that on our website and starting to put information together on pests and diseases, of course it had to be general information because beekeeping, as you know, varies enormously from place to place, and the pests and diseases do as well. We needed that information there. But at the same time as we were feeling concerned about that certainly the beekeeping world, beekeepers around the world were going, whoa, what's going to happen? Very worried that there'd be neglected hives from people that got excited and then just let them die and so on. And, we share that concern. Of course, although it'd be great, you can't control your customers. And we've got thousands and thousands of stories where people took our advice seriously and said, well, I went and did a beekeeping course and I think I'll get my bees, but I might just do one more course before I actually get my bees. So we had lots of stories like that. And of course, there are plenty of stories circulating in bee clubs of people that didn't understand and didn't care for their bees as well. And who knows what the percentages are. But I think, as you know, we've kept up that educational side of things to the extent that 18 months ago we started up another website that's purely about learning about bees and interviewing experts like yourselves from all around the world, giving 5 or 10 minutes of their wisdom on beekeeping. And that's called thebeekeeper.org. And that has been enormously successful. And so it's just another kit in the educational opportunities for people to learn proper husbandry of bees.
Another good resource, certainly. Well, one of the questions that always comes up when you've got something that isn't the old standard Langstroth is it suitable for pollination? And what you've explained is absolutely it is. You just take the Flow box off, put it on your regular boxes, or just leave it off and put it in the back of your truck and move it to the orchard. When you're done, you bring it back and put the Flow box back on.
That's correct. Yeah, if you're moving them around for pollination, usually they're doing a single box, aren't they? And for the almonds, there's not much nectar coming in, but a bit of pollen and so on. So it depends on what you're trying to pollinate. But you're correct, Kim. That's all you need to do.
Well, one of the what's the word I want? One of the thoughts going around is that a Flow hive is in and of itself all one component, as opposed to different pieces, and that to me makes a lot of sense, but also a lot of difference in who would accept using one of these.
Yeah, that's been the assumption somehow, because, as I said, most people, 80% of people, wanted to buy the whole hive, and so even in beekeeping clubs, before people had seen the hive, they assumed that the whole thing was different, whereas actually the brood box is exactly the same, except that we weren't supplying foundation. And so, and we were saying, well, probably the best option is naturally drawn comb, but if they want to put foundation in, of course they can. But basically they're the same. The brood box is the same. Ventilated base, it's our ventilated base, but there's plenty of those on the markets. There's a queen excluder, of course. Yeah, and things only change as you look at the super. And then the roof itself and the inner cover, well, there's a whole variety of those, on the market and, of course, made at home. Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about equipment, I just had a clarification question. The super, is it a full, deep Langstroth honey super?
That's correct.
Okay. And then once you essentially drain the frames of honey, what happens to that frame? I assume it closes, it whatever pulls back together, and then what do the bees, how do they handle the empty comb at that point?
Jeff, you've touched on something that was a really important question for us when we first, I mentioned that moment when we first achieved it, and the honey came out of those our first experiments. You can turn the lever again to return what's become channels to hexagons, the honey storing honeycomb that we know, the hexagonal comb. So we knew we could return it to the same shape, but we also knew that, well, the honey's been drained out of it, all the walls have been cracked, the capping itself is more or less intact, although sometimes with some fissures in it. What would the bees do? We didn't know. No one knew, of course. And we thought, well, they might abscond because they're really, there's something severely wrong with the hive that they're in. They might just not notice that the honey's gone, and that would be a failure as far as we're concerned, because then you'd have this capped comb with nothing in it. So luckily for us, the bees chew away the capping within 24 hours. I was watching a hive the other day where you could see the bees carrying the capping and the bits of capping off and away to another part of the hive. I'd love to see, where they deposit it and how they store it and use it again. And then they dive down those cracked cells, clean up the last of the honey and repair the cells and start filling them again. So that was a welcome relief for Cedar and I to find that the bees would do that, because the invention wouldn't work unless, you could return the frames to the hexagonal comb position and the bees begin again. But they do. And, of course, if you've got a good flow on, a good nectar flow, then they'll fill it up very, very quickly.
So you don't have to worry about the honey, the little residue of honey that's left in there crystallizing and excuse the pun, gumming up the works, so that you couldn't move the crank and move the adjacent cells.
Well, we do have to worry about crystallizing honey. And as you know, that's a time factor. So canola honey can crystallize very quickly. You call it canola in America, and they call it oilseed rape in the UK. And
Yep.
Australia, we call it canola. Anyway, that's the big concern in Europe, oilseed rape honey, because their fields are dotted in and around their whole urban and rural areas, in contrast to Australia and I guess America, where huge fields are well away. You have to move your bees there specifically if you're going to get that sort of honey. There's plenty of different nectars that'll turn into honey and crystallize easily. And so if you're in the middle of your spring and summer and you harvest and the bees are filling it up again, there's not going to be any trouble if it's non-crystallizing honey. But if it is crystallizing honey, like canola, then it can go off quite quickly, beekeepers know. And then it's just as much of a problem for a flow hive as it is for the standard one. It's very annoying to get crystallized honey out. And so some people take the super or the frames off and heat them up in a box to 40, well, what we say 40 degrees. I'm not sure what it is in Fahrenheit. That's one method. Another method is to put the candied honey in a super below the brood and then put another empty super on top, and the bees will, apparently not always, because bees don't always do what you want them to do, will transfer that honey from the bottom through the brood to the top and in the process, re-liquefy it. The advantage of the flow frames is that you can harvest at any time. So if you do have, canola's coming in, you can harvest as soon as you know it's ripe. And another advantage of the flow hives is that you can just sample the very end. You don't have to insert the key all the way in and take the whole frame at once. You can just take half an inch of the frame, the closest half an inch to the back of the hive, and you can sample that to see if it's ripe enough, of course, and whether it's beginning to crystallize, I guess, if you're starting to see it. So therefore you can harvest, as I said, anytime you like. If you're an amateur, you don't have to wait for the weekend, which by then it's too late. I can't guarantee this method, but Cedar and I have had crystallized honey in it, and we found, as you would expect, that you'd insert the key and try to turn it, but if every cell is full of crystallized honey, the mechanism just won't move. It's solid. We exerted quite a lot of force and nothing was moving, so we sort of gave up. But we're surprised to find that the next day the bees had chewed the honey out of that particular frame. I don't know that would work every time, but it seemed like the bees must have sensed that even though we thought we hadn't moved a thing, we had cracked the cells enough, the honeycomb cells enough, for the bees to get a little bit worried, so they pulled all the crystallized honey out and moved it round. We can't advertise that method. I'm not promoting that because that's a hit and miss one. But
it sounds like it can be handled though, any of several ways, which is good. And if you're on top of things, you won't get into that. You won't have that as an issue anyway. But
that's right.
If all of us were on top of things all of the time, I'd be surprised, as a matter of fact. Well, you just came out with, I want to say, a new model with a lot of additional resources on it.
Happily for me, Cedar and I still keep working every week in the shed. So our first one on the market, what we call the classic Flow Hive, of course wasn't perfect. No, it's still, there's always improvements you can make.
Yeah.
So for the Flow Hive 2, we added better knobs, brass knobs, and we added the base that was adjustable because the Flow Hive is unusual in that it slopes backwards rather than forwards. And you need to get that sort of tilt right for the flow frames to work effectively. And, of course, every beekeeper knows you need your hives reasonably level side to side, otherwise the bees will be, particularly in open what are called natural type frames, they'll build sort of crooked. So, there's leveling devices, the actual levels embedded in the base, and then there's a nice tray that you can use we have had a lot of trouble with small hive beetles where I live, and so I usually put cooking oil in the tray and the bees chase the beetles down, and so soon there's dozens of drowned beetles in the bottom tray. And so that's a useful sort of pest monitoring tool to have a tray that you can pull out and watch what the bees are discarding. Have a look at that. The way the base itself is mesh, so it breathes a bit. You can control that with the cover at the back. And then you go on to the brood box. Yeah, not too many changes there. And then the super itself, we put a window on each side so that you can see the flow frames from the side. What else have we done there? Oh, we've improved the inner cover, made it more insulating, and made the roof so that it locks on rather than blows off in a hurricane. So, yeah. So we have made a lot of improvements, and we'll continue to do that, of course.
Yeah, it looked good. I was looking at all the details and done a nice job on it. One of the things that I was thinking about on this was, you also have Jeff. If you've seen the new one, I don't have ants where I am in Ohio, or at least I don't have them much. But when I was in Wisconsin, we had issues with ants, and he's got this built-in ant trap on each of the legs that you can fill with oil or something that I thought was quite clever, and you can adjust. You were saying to make it level, but the ant thing's still down there catching ants.
Yeah, that's right. We have trouble with ants in a sense. They're common enough. I've never found them really to threaten the hive or the colony, and the bees keep them sort of out basically. But it's just you're brushing ants out of the way to get to the hive, and when you open it and when you operate the flow frames at the back, sometimes you pull off the cover and it's full of ants. So it is nice to stop them in areas where they are a problem.
Looking back, and you have the history here with the Flow Hive, would you recommend this for first-year new beekeeper, or would you recommend that they get a year or two in before they start experimenting with the Flow Super and Flow Hive?
In Australia, we have a well-known beekeeper. I enjoy his company very much, but he's very, very direct and blunt. Hard-edged, and he'll say there's only 3 things you need: good breeding, good nutrition, and your pest management. The type of hive, whatever, he just doesn't have any time for that. He just says those are your 3 things. And I agree with him. The most important thing is that a new person is connected with an experienced beekeepers, whether it's a neighbour or a club or whatever, and are getting advice about the local conditions. And the first thing they're going to need is, a brood box of bees, and without a super on of any sort, really, as because they're likely to get a package or a swarm, or they'll start off in a small way, and so they're going to need their food, the nutrition. The bees are going to have to be. It'll be spring or summer, or hopefully a good year, and the bees will expand quickly. Then once they have expanded, is the time to put on an ordinary super or a flow super, or if it's a top bar hive, to expand the hive, the little dividers they have in there or whatever. So that's the flow super or whatever is the second stage. The first stage is studying bees, learning good husbandry, as I've talked about before, caring for your bees, and then when they expand, that second stage is deciding what sort of super.
Yeah.
And of course, I'll advocate for the flow super for an amateur. It means that harvesting is so easy, and they can include their family and their grandkids and, their neighbours in the harvesting. It becomes fun, a little party sitting around the hive, and it's somehow, the whole thing is a miracle, really, isn't it? That honey is an extraordinary substance, and to see it coming directly out of the hive. Meanwhile, the bees are going in and out the other end, bringing in more, and to watch them crawling, into the cells and cleaning up after what you've done, and for the kids to be part of that, I just think that's really, really special, and you can't really get that with any other hive.
That's really true, and we are strong advocates of mentorships and working with other beekeepers.
I really hope that the next generation are much more aware of the insects and the insect world and how important our pollinators are. I guess beekeeping is one avenue, one window into that world, and it's so if we can introduce kids early and realise that not all bugs are a problem. In fact, most bugs are really vital for us and the extraordinary life we live.
And you've added a lot of windows to that world with your boxes.
Quite literally. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, as we're coming up to the end of on our episode on the Flow Hive, anything we haven't asked that you want to make sure that our listeners are aware of?
There's lots and lots of questions that come, and one is, can you have lots and lots of supers? And of course you can. Have a friend in Canada that has had 5 flow supers on top of a brood. Wow. And then sometimes there's experiment with the brood top and bottom, as you can do, because in Canada northern Canada gets such a rush, when their season comes on. Boy, oh boy, incredible. And so of course you can put more flow supers together if that's what works for your region and your area in beekeeping. And of course you're going to have multiple boxes or 1.5 boxes of brood or whatever suits you. So that's a question that comes up now and then. Queen excluders and not queen excluders. We have designed the flow frames to not be attractive for the queen to lay in. And so very, very rarely we've found the queen actually laying in the flow frames. We've had it when we did use an excluder on one hive and accidentally trapped her in the top. Of course, that happens, and if she has to lay there, she will, but generally she'll prefer not to. And when a hive goes queenless, the size of the flow frame cells is more like a drone size. And when a hive goes queenless, the workers will start laying everywhere, including flow frames. So early indication that you're in trouble.
Well, Stu, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your early morning there in Australia to be with us on the Beekeeping Today podcast to talk about the Flow Hive and shed some light on the wonderful design, wonderful invention that you've given us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks very much, Kim. I've really enjoyed talking with you. The experience behind your questions and how much we could talk about these in beekeeping, I get very excited about. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, it's been fun. Thank you for your time.
I really enjoyed having Stuart on the show. Talking to him, I learned more about the Flow Hive than I have. I had a lot of preconceived notions based on what I'd heard, but I hadn't actually heard how it works and some of the strengths of it. It's good to have him on the show.
Yeah, I think I particularly enjoyed the history of how it came to be. One thing is a nice father-son story, certainly, but the way their two minds worked in harmony and together worked, was a good story. What they came up with is actually pretty amazing, and that it works as well as it does is, to me, even more amazing. I'm impressed with the technology that they developed. It took them a while to get it manufacturing, and then they became a wood supply dealer to a lot of people, which really surprised them. But I can see why it all went together. But here's the thing: if you're going to look at this, you don't have to buy the whole hive. You just have to buy the one box, and that's all you need. And the other thing that I found interesting was that they've solved a lot of their early problems. The tilt that you gotta have, and some of those things with these new models. So they've got we'll have their webpage on our webpage. You can take a look, and you can take a look at a bunch of the pictures that I've worked a Flow Hive a couple of times, and I've taken had a number of pictures there that you can look at. You can look at how how the frame works, and when it's closed and when it's open, and so I'm impressed with the technology and the simplicity, and I might get one if they put it in 8-frame medium.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really good. And like you said, the big takeaway for me is that it's not the entire hive. It's just the honey, essentially the honey super side. And that was totally unaware of that. So I would encourage our listeners, if you have any kind of preconceived notion of what the Flow Hive is, to reconsider it. Listen to Stuart's description again. Go to their website. Listen to their videos, look at Kim's pictures that we're going to have up on our website and show notes. And, it might be worth an investigation and a use.
one of the things that also impressed me was the fact that a lot of people who started with Flow Hives were beginners, and they actually were making this for commercials, and it didn't go that way. It went to the beginners, and it took them just a little bit, but they figured out real quick that if beginners are going to be using this hive, we better be teaching beginners how to keep bees, because they're not going to be around very long, and they of course want people to keep on keeping bees. So when you go to their webpage, take a look at their how to keep bees videos, because they're really good.
Yeah, they've done a lot of great work with that. So kudos to Flow Hive and Stuart and his son, and keep up the good work. Okay, well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. You can get there directly from our website by clicking on reviews along the top of any web page. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for their support. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And thank you to Better Bee for joining us as our latest supporter. Check out their full line of beekeeping supplies at www.betterbee.com. And finally, and most importantly, we thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kim?
Keep those questions coming.
Thanks, everybody.